All right, Jeff Browning, it is a pleasure to have you on the Singletrack podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing good. Excited to have you on. And I want to start this conversation about a race that is in my backyard here in Salt Lake, the Wasatch 100. At one point in time, it was one of the big dog races in the sport. I still think it's a pinnacle race in its own way, but I'm eager to see it become a big dog race again. You won it back in 2012 in like 1930, ran it again last year in a thrilling finish. Aside from the fact that it's part of that Rocky Mountain Slam, what's the draw for you to that race?
Well, I ran it. I was introduced to it in 2003. I paced a buddy. Uh, I had done my first 100 in 2002, and then went and paced in '03. And then I was like, well, I got to do this race. And back then it was a classic. I mean, it was one of the few. It was the third. I think it was the third 100-mile race in the US. That it was
Yeah.
Western States, then it was Leadville, and then it was Wasatch. So it's one of the original three. So back when I got in the sport in '01, it was a big race. And I came back in '04 and ran it. That's when I started figuring out that I might, if I focus on these things, I might be able to do them okay.
Yeah.
I think I ran like 23:32 or something like that. I broke 24, and got in the you know Royal Order of the Crimson Cheetah. And there was a bigger ceremony back then. Let's just say that you used to have to put on a Burger King crown, paper crown and all that. So, and they came out like with a cape on and like you know knighted you over the shoulder. You had to kneel. Um, but I don't think they do that anymore. They did, at least they didn't do it last year. Uh,
No.
but it's a classic, and it's a hard race. Um, Aesthetically, it's a cool race because it's point to point. I mean, logistically, it's a pain because it's a point to point. But it's a really classic race. It's hard, and that's what kind of drew me back. I hadn't been back since 2012, and I had run the original kind of the old school course, both the other two times, '04 and 2012, and then they changed the finish and a few other
Yeah.
changes in the start. So I hadn't done the new course until last year, so it was cool to go back and see all the changes they'd done.
Is the newer course a little slower in your opinion?
I think it is. I think it's a
Okay.
little slower. I think a lot of that course is more overgrown than it used to be. Um,
Mm.
it, and that first climb's tougher than I was expecting. It was harder than Chin Scraper,
Yeah.
right? Because the old Chin Scraper um, was like kind of a big deal. Like everybody talked about it, but it was pretty short. It really was over pretty quickly, and you got like a nice, like, you know, warm up out of Kaysville. So, it's probably at least, if I remember right, it's like a 3 or 4 mile kind of traverse, rolly, kind of nice, like, a lot of like high use trail. And the newer stuff's like a little more primitive to start, and it's really gnarly that first climb. Um, there was a lot of overgrowth on the course compared to last time I did it. Um, I do think that the finish line's definitely harder. It seemed more direct the
Yeah.
old way, to get to the finish line. I missed the old. I have to admit, the Homestead finish.
I know.
It was so sweet, and you finished on a pretty solid downhill, you know, um, and out of pot bottom. So you had to do a climb, but the climb wasn't that long. It was more double track or ATV. It wasn't that hard. And then you had like a softball rock ATV downhill, and then, but it was a I really like. I still like the course though. I mean, it's still a good course, and I think the new finish line is pretty cool at that Nordic Center. Um,
Yeah.
you know, so it's got some potential still. I mean, I would say this, and this isn't meant to be like coming down on the course,
Please. No, go.
but
Yeah.
I do think um it would probably you know it would benefit the race to go the organization to go check out some of the other races that are out there now, just because ultra running, like your experience and the finish line stuff has gone to another level in ultras, and they're pretty still old school, and not necessarily that's a bad thing, but I think people expect more now. Um,
Right.
when it comes to like food and finish line and like all of that, and like the festivities at the finish line and like the experience. And I think that they could probably get more numbers if they just focused on that a little more. Um, it's still a cool race, though.
And you might have already answered this next question, but like I was just going to ask you because there was that whole era, let's call it like '05 to like 2012, where guys like you, Carl, Jeff Rose, Jared Campbell were like doing battle on that course. And like there was just like an exodus of top talent for like the last decade. And would you attribute it to that? Just like the race kind of got like old and in the way?
Well, and I think that there's a bunch of other competing races that showed up with a different with, for example, for the elites, Run Rabbit Run showed up and UTMB,
Yeah.
right? UTMB's like, you know, it's whether you like it or not, it's kind of the world the unofficial world championships, right? Of ultra running for 100 milers, and then we have nationally, we have Run Rabbit Run, which has a huge cash purse, 7 deep. Like you can make 15 grand for first. And so I went to that in the 2013 on. Like I went to Run Rabbit like 4 times. I was in the money every time there. I made a couple times made 5 grand there. So for third place. So it was super competitive, and it was fun to go race a bunch of guys at the end of the season. Um, and Steamboat's got just being at Steamboat Resort, it's a sweet finish line. Steamboat's a really cool town. It's pretty easy to crew, you
Yeah.
know, I have to say, Wasatch is logistically, you can't really crew it. I think that's
There's
one
like
of the
three spots.
yeah, 3 spots. Like if you want it to be a premier race, you've got to allow access. And I know
That's a
that
really good point.
that's really frustrating for like someone who wants to run fast. We want crew there because that's
Right.
going to help us run fast. Um, and you want people to be able to you want video and media to be able to get on the course, and that kind of stuff, because that's an important piece, right? Of just marketing a race as well. We're in a different era, man. I mean, I've seen it change a lot in 20. This is my 24th season, so I've
Well, I
seen
was
it
going to
change
say,
a
so, I
lot.
mean, speaking of different eras, you've been competitively relevant for over 20 years now. Like you can go back to 2005 and you still had like a competitive fire and you were, beginning to get to the height of your powers. You've seen a lot of elites come and go. I know this is probably a loaded
Oh, a
question,
lot
but
come and go, man.
who were some of your favorite athletes to compete against in each of those generations and why?
Oh,
I know it's a long list, but just a couple, who comes to the top of mind?
well, I mean, the guys that have faded away, they're younger than me. Like Scott Jurick's one, right? He comes like immediately top of the mind. I'm older than Scott. And he's just
That's
not.
wild.
Yeah, right. And just it's crazy to look at his times when he's winning Western States and then compare it to the last, like, say 5 or 6 years, and just how some of my times, for example, my ninth in 2019 at Western States was 15:55 for ninth, and his fastest time was 15:37 when he broke the course record in '05, I think. So I would have, in that year, I would have beat like most of his 7 wins for ninth, right? I barely got in the top 10. So it just kind of shows like how the sport's evolved. It's just gone kind of like crazy. It's just so competitive now. And I think we
Yeah.
know more about training and nutrition and hydration and electrolytes. And, we were still learning stuff back then. We just have a lot more tools too now.
I was just gonna say, like, if you, and this is a total hypothetical, but like if you dropped a prime Scott Jurek into 2024 and he had all of the resources and the knowledge that we know now, would he be in that same group of athletes trying to run 1440, or was he hitting his peak, running
That's a
1536?
hard one. I don't know. I mean, only Scott can tell us that one. I would
Yeah,
like to think he might be been a little stronger, but he was pretty
yeah,
geeky back then. About his approach. And he was relatively. I mean, he was doing PT and stuff, but he was relatively one of the first ones to kind of become a pro in the U.S. Him and
yeah.
Carl. Um, I mean, Carl's another one that I really enjoyed. Carl and I raced quite a few times. So, Run Rabbit Run, we duked it out where he was second, I was third, 1 year. And I raced him another time at a race in Southern California that got canceled at mile 75. It was the first time I ever was beating Carl. And I had him by like 30 minutes at like mile 75. And they got 9 inches of rain in the Santa Monicas. They got 9 inches of rain in like 24 hours. And it was in the middle of the storm, middle of the night. And I came down to 75, and Cheryl, his wife, was standing there with an umbrella, and it's just dumping rain. It was snowing up on top, and it was dumping rain, wet snow up on top, and it was dumping rain down below because you came down all these aid stations off the top. And they had one aid station on top that was getting blown away. They were having like 70, 80 mile an hour winds. And she just goes, "Jeff, I'm sorry, but they just canceled the race." I was like, "What? Oh my gosh." I mean, that's just ultras, trail races, sometimes they're crazy.
Do you think for a lot of the guys you competed against, like especially 10, 15, 20 years ago, do you think they ended up leaving the sport more because they were mentally done with it, or because their bodies failed them and they didn't have the fortune that you had to come across like dietary interventions and new training methodology to kind of to keep at it?
That's a good question. I mean, I think it's a little bit of everything. Some people get burned out and they just don't have the will to keep training hard and pushing it. I think some people aren't willing to go to the diet side of things. They just keep, like I know Jeff Rose had some kind of metabolic stuff going on. So, he never could quite get on top of it. And I think it depends on, I guess it depends on how open you are to changing too. I mean, we've evolved as we needed to. I mean, my wife and I were vegetarians in our 20s, and then we started eating meat again because we weren't thriving on it. To we weren't willing to go there as far as like, oh, we think this is what we're supposed to do. I wanted to thrive. And then you learn that, like, oh, well, the natural way of the planet is herbivores on millions of acres, not monoculture and corn, soybeans, and wheat on millions of acres. But I digress. I won't go down that path right now. But
You grew up on a farm, so that's legit.
I did, man. I mean, I know, dude. I mean, we were a commercial farm. We had corn, soybeans, wheat, and we had livestock, commercial livestock. So, I grew up hunting and fishing and dealing with like the commercial side of farming. I've seen it up close and personal. It's dirty, it's gross, it's bad for the environment. And monoculture is not good for the planet. So, everyone eating grains out there, you are not doing the planet any favors right now. So, but you can live in that la la land all you want, but the fact of the matter is the natural environment, we're hunter gatherers, our eyes are on the front of our head. You give me anybody who's not a predator that their eyes are not on the front of their head. Um, you know, we're supposed to eat meat. And our GI tracts are built that way. So, you know, I think that, I do think that that's the natural way, and that's been the cool thing about this whole process and this whole evolution for me from a dietary perspective. Not only did I go after it because of health issues, but I also did it for the planet too. Like when you start supporting like grass-fed, grass-finished beef and hunting and a wild mimicked farming, the more natural ranching kind of approach, you're mimicking what Mother Nature intended, right? That's the way our planet's supposed to be. Um, and I know that's not a very popular subject in some circles, at least in the mainstream circles, but it's I don't know. You can't get away from your genetics.
No, I think it's a great topic of conversation. What I wanted to ask you off that is whether or not you're surprised that, because you had that inflection point back in like 2016 after Hurt, right? You're like, something's got to give. I'm not even sure I can be in the sport anymore after this. Something's got to change. You did the OFM thing. You got more into strength, mobility, etc. Are you surprised that it gave you 8 to 9 more years of high performance in the sport? Like, what were you expecting? Your
I
like
was
life,
just desperate at the time, like I was having health issues in 2015 and I switched in December of 15, right before Hurt of 16.
before
And
Hurt. Okay.
yeah, right before Hurt, about 7 weeks before Hurt, December 1st, 2015. And I cut out grains, I cut out sugar, and 80, 90% of the time. I was really strict back then. I'm not dogmatic about it. I'll cheat occasionally, and I'll definitely have a burger with a bun every once in a while and some French fries. But
And this isn't keto, right? It's not. We're not saying
no,
it's
we're
keto.
not keto. No, and really, it's evolved. What's kind of cool, I was very strict in the early days, but more because I was having some health stuff, and that was the only thing that kept it in check was really low carb. But what I found as I evolved over the years, and Mike McKnight and I both, because I introduced Mike to this, but he didn't do it that long after me. I want to say he started in 2017. But he and I both, because I've coached him for like 5 years, and he and I both have kind of evolved our approach over the years to more of a kind of animal based diet. So it'd be like more carnivore keto. So it's like high protein, high animal protein diet, animal centered, raw dairy and a lot of red meat, a lot of eggs, and then and high protein, like 1.1 to 1.3 grams per pound of body weight.
Yeah.
So to put that in perspective, I'm 142 pounds. I shoot for 150 to 180 grams of protein a day. So 50 to 70 grams in 3 servings.
Okay.
So a decent amount of protein, animal protein, and then carbs from more fruit and starch like potatoes and sweet potatoes strategically. That's where OFM comes in, is strategic carbohydrate use around effort and volume. So I ebb and flow my carbs according to effort and volume. So I'm on bigger blocks, I'm eating a little more carbs, but I'm always pretty high protein. And we used to be a little more moderate protein, and then you really have to focus on like the strategic carb piece has to be even more important. But when the
Yeah.
protein's higher, you recover fast, your inflammation's really low, you're not messing with your blood sugar very often, because the more carbs you have, the more you're going to mess with your blood sugar, which means you're going to have an insulin response, which then means says store fat in the cell. And when you're 52, you put on weight really fast compared to your 30-year-old self. And so you're like, whoa, where'd that spare tire come from in off season? You know? Um, and whereas where protein, just keeps me lean, and it keeps me recovering really, really fast, and the inflammation's really low.
I'm super ignorant on the diet side of things. What I will add to the conversation, you can critique this as you will. I've always thought that whether it was veganism or OFM or keto, the primary reason why people had so much success with those dietary interventions is largely because they were cutting out processed food, junk food, stuff that would primarily contribute to inflammation and whatnot. And it was less so like the distribution of macronutrient choices. And I don't know what you have to say there, but that's always been my first
Well, I would
instinct
say
with
this
all this
after being a vegetarian and coaching vegetarians, especially aging vegetarians, uh, it eventually catches up to you. Um, you may not want to admit it, but you lose muscle mass. You don't get enough protein. We lose our protein synthesis goes down as we age. It slows down, meaning we're not as efficient, and so our protein intake needs to go up. And when you start talking about protein, we can talk about bioavailability. And this is a very simple illustration of the differences between vegetarian protein sources and, like, say, animal-based protein. So
yeah.
if we go to, like, say, a full amino acid profile, we can talk about beans and rice, right? In the vegetarian camp. Well, that bioavailability of that food is about less than 50%. So, and like, say, an 8-ounce steak is going to be over 90% bioavailable, meaning the body recognizes it, knows the nutrients, it knows the amino acid profile. It can, like, break it down. There's no anti-nutrients in it. It's not going to fight your body's ability to absorb the nutrients. Okay. So an 8-ounce steak is basically meaning to get the same bioavailability, you got to eat double the amount in beans and rice. I mean, you got to eat a pound of beans and rice or a half pound of beef, right? So
Yeah.
right there, you're going to have trouble keep maintaining weight as you age. Trust me, you put it on easier as you get older. So you really have to, like, that's what we really talk about in our more, like, what we call, like, an ancestral approach to food, like hunter gatherer type of idea, is bioavailability, right? And that's why fruit and raw dairy and animal based foods are all super highly bioavailable and very nutrient dense, And I agree with you. Yes, if we cut out processed food, you're immediately going to have better results, right? But eventually, what I see in the vegetarian camp, personally, and in my own experience with vegetarianism and my wife's, that I lost muscle mass
Mm.
immediately on a vegetarian diet, and so it's really hard to maintain muscle mass on a vegetarian approach, right? You kind of see them start to get skinny fat, as they age. And because you lose so much muscle. Whereas you look at the like carnivore camp or the kind of like high fat, low carb camp, they're all ripped. They all look great. Even when they're in their 50s, they still look good, and it's cool because of my coaching business, we coach this OFM approach, and we evolve it because it's a little more higher protein, right, intake. But I see guys like in their 60s getting back down to their high school weight, 6-pack, muscles, pecs. You put them on a little bit of like lighter strength training, approach, like consistent strength training and running and a good diet. And all of a sudden they go from having a little spare tire to like, whoa, I can see my abs again. And that's pretty cool when you have someone in their 60s saying, hey, they look good in their t-shirt and they got a 6-pack again.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of a rewarding part of the job, I have to say.
Coming back though to just where you're at as an athlete in the sport, performing at a pretty high level, like the last 3, 4, 5 years at Hard Rock, you're running 26, 27 hours, you're winning these 200-mile races. Great time at Scout a couple years back. I know that course. I know who's run it recently. Very strong time. Are you surprised that you're still at? I'm not going to say like the height. Like not 2019 Western States Jeff is very impressive in my opinion. I don't know if you could replicate that performance, but like, are you surprised that you're still right up there?
I guess sometimes a little bit. I didn't think I would still be this fast in my 50s. I thought I would have slowed down more, but I am motivated. I mean, I'm motivated to train hard still. I still have the drive. Last time I got tested, my testosterone's still really good. So, that's probably because I eat so much animal protein, I'm sure. But I still am motivated. I haven't lost that drive, and I think that's half the battle is just getting out the door every day to train.
Mm,
Finding that like why.
mm.
Why do I have to go do hard work? You have to go put in the work. I'm doing it right now, getting ready for Cocodona.
You see it a lot in other sports, like Wayne Gretzky has that quote, "Skate where the puck is going," and you'll see a lot of like veterans in their crafts, like if they lose a step from like an athleticism or a agility standpoint, they can make up for it and just kind of knowing how the game flows, and they just have like that intellectual component at their zenith. Do you, even like if we're looking 5 years down the road, do you still feel like you could, even if like you do start to age more rapidly, you could outmaneuver athletes and still be relevant at these like 200-mile distances? Like you mentioned Cocodona, like I have to imagine this race, I mean, it is a physical test, but I feel like logistically,
Yeah, there's a lot of moving
mentally,
parts.
there's a lot of moving parts.
A lot more in 200s. I think the longer distances you can be relevant for a long time if you're willing to put in the work. And and I have to say, I do the work. I do mobility, weekly mobility. I do strength training 3 times a week most weeks. um Only time I don't put in 3 days a week in the gym is in the big volume blocks when you're in peak training.
Mm.
For like something like Cocodona, 3 to 4 weeks out. Like I just put in 2 out of the last 6 weeks. I put in 400+ mile weeks. So when you're putting 100+ mile weeks on trail at altitude, it's 95% dirt. That it takes a lot of time. So there's not a lot of extra time to go to the gym when I throw in coaching. So something's got to give a little bit. So in those times, the strength, but most of the year it's 3 times a week, most of the season.
I guess the last question on this front, and again, this is a super subjective, opinionated question or a response to it. But like, if you took the UROY top 10 from the year like 2008 or 2009, assuming that a lot of those people were around your age range, if they had followed your protocol like you have the last 8 years, do you think that they would still be in the sport operating at a pretty high level, or are you like a genetic anomaly?
I think they could still be in the sport.
Really?
Yeah, I think, well, the nutritional thing and strength and mobility. So that's one when people ask why longevity, or or why I've had longevity in sport, I say there's multifaceted reasons there, right? But a lot of it is like you have to be motivated to still want to do the work. I think that's one. You got to have the motivation. Number two, I think the other things besides running, so nutrition, mobility, and strength are the three big things, the key to my performance over the last 6 or 7 years. I mean, the especially the diet. Like I can't tell you how because I've been strength training since 8th grade pretty consistently. I mean, I took a little bit of a break in my late 20s when I was
You were a
chasing.
football player, right?
Yeah, I played football, basketball, baseball, track and field. I played 4 sports a year in high school.
Yeah.
But my football coach was an early adopter to strength training. We were on the Nebraska football team, 1980s Nebraska strength training program, all through high school, 8th grade through senior year. So I lifted weights 4 days a week. You had to take PE. My head football coach was the PE teacher in junior high and high school. And you had to, if you wanted to start on Friday nights, you took PE, and we lifted 4 days a week on the Nebraska strength training program year round. So I have a huge foundation of that, right? So if you look at like me as an athlete, you do have to keep that in perspective. Like I played 4 sports a year. I excelled in 2 of those sports. I did pretty well. I was a really good football player. Almost went to college, and like smaller college as a wide receiver. Um,
Nice.
all conference wide receiver. I won my conference in the 800 meter my senior year. So and I wasn't crazy fast. I mean, my PR was like a 202. So it wasn't like collegiate fast, but it was fast enough to win my conference.
Yeah.
I got smoked at districts and didn't go to state and my senior year. But I went on and then got into mountain biking in college. So I never quit working out. I was always running 2 or 3, 4 days a week. I was lifting weights 3 or 4 days a week all through college, just for fun. And then I was mountain biking like crazy. I was mountain biking probably 4 or 5 days a week. Sometimes 2 or 3 hour mountain bike rides. So I was training endurance that whole time, but I wasn't like really competing. And so, but I was always competitive, competitive with your bros when you're riding a mountain bike, or whatever. But I started getting into ultras in my late 20s, and I was always super competitive. Like there was always a drive, but and I was always very consistent. I was always self-motivated.
Mm. Couple more historical questions I've always wanted to ask you. First one, I want to hear how you got involved with Ultra, but even before that, talking about how you became a professional, talk about how you got linked up with Patagonia, because for me, they're very interesting because they're no longer as visible in the sport. They had that footwear play for a bit that didn't really pan out. How did that begin?
I got on the Montreal Patagonia team in 03. So what I'd call I was on the like Jurek and Meltzer were on like the A team, and I was like on the C team.
Little did they know.
Yeah, so like my early in the sport, I got in on that early. They were one of the first major sponsors in ultra running. It was Montreal was a tiny little 20-person, I think, outfit out of Seattle, and Patagonia was a pretty small company at the time. And the two of them teamed up to form an ultra running team. So Patagonia provided the clothing, and Montreal provided the shoes. And so I was on that until 05. And in 05, end of 05, Montreal got bought out by Columbia. And I had me and a buddy who owned an outdoor store, who carried like 50% of his floor he was an ultra runner too, and
Was
he was
this
on
Rod?
Rod Bean was on the
Yeah.
Montreal Patagonia team as well. And he and I like got our heads together because he had contacts at Patagonia, and when they bought out, he came to me the day at the buyout. His shop was like around the block of my graphic design studio downtown Bend. And all of a sudden he shows up at like 10 in the morning. He's like, Browning, like Montreal just got bought out by Columbia. That means the team's going to fall apart because that's going to be a conflict of interest. And so he's like, I was like, well, I care about Patagonia, not Montreal, And he's like, me too. I'm like, he goes, well, let's call someone at Patagonia. So we call someone at Patagonia and ask him like, hey, do you guys want to continue to have an ultra running team? And they're like, yeah, I think so. So then they asked Rod and I who we should bring on. So like it was
No
like
way.
Chrissy Mail, and I'm trying to think who it was, Justin Angle, and there's about 4 or 5 of us that like were already on kind of like the Montreal Patagonia team already, and we all like Patagonia. So we like all went to Patagonia and started the grassroots Patagonia ultra running team in 06. Basically, it was the first year. Like the first year, I handled printing the shirts, like the logo on the shirts, because I was a graphic designer, and they had no one really to manage it or anything. It was so like, it was funny.
And then it was like a 10-year run.
Yeah, we had a great team for a while, and then I became one of their. They're kind of like what we call a small salaried position as an athlete is their ambassador program. So I became an ambassador in like 2012 or 2013. I don't remember. And then I did that till 2020, and then I went over to take a bigger role at Ultra. I was kind of splitting my sponsors were split between Patagonia and Ultra for all those years, and then I kind of went to Ultra.
Yeah, how did the Ultra thing come about?
That was like 2000. Well, so I'd helped with the Patagonia footwear line because we designed a shoe called the Everlong. It actually had Giddy Up stamped on the
No way.
on the outsole. So this came out, that shoe came out for 1 year, 2014, and then Patagonia decided that like one of the things they really look at is like, can we keep like they like to look at the production from start to finish and how they can clean the process up. And I think they figured out that footwear is really a dirty process because all the glues and the molds and the foams and the rubbers. So all the compounds are pretty toxic, right? I mean, take a brand new shoe out of a box, it reeks, right? It's like off gassing. It's not a super clean process by nature. And I think there's certain things they've learned over the years that they can clean up, and certain things they just have to accept. And that's one of the things that like I think that was part of the issue there, that they just couldn't control the process as well as they'd like to have. And I think they decided that wasn't a battle they were willing to fight, probably. I don't know the exact reasons. I'm sure there are other reasons besides that, but that was one of them. And that was a short-lived project. And I learned in 2014, about midway through the season, that was happening, that they were phasing out footwear. Okay. And I was at Outdoor Retailer in Salt Lake. And I remember when Outdoor Retailer was in Salt Lake City, is now in Denver. But I used to go every year. And I was standing, I think, at the Goo booth. And one of the founders at Ultra came up behind me and said, hey, we'd like you on the team. And he goes, I hear there's a rumor that Patagonia footwear is going away. And I said, I think that rumor is true. And so I said, he goes, well, let me send you some shoes. And if you like the shoes, let's talk. And so that's kind of how that started.
Obviously, there's great perks to being a pro runner, like, comping races, the salary, trips covered, whatnot. But have you
not
enjoyed
very big salary?
Not big. No one out there is inking tiny. Like 6-year, $40 million deals with a $20 million guarantee. But have you enjoyed the marketing aspect of it? Like, do you enjoy kind of telling the brand story? And
I do. I've been in branding and graphic design and marketing most of my career. 20 plus years, art director and graphic designer. I had my own business in Bend for 17 years, helping brand and doing branding and marketing and web design and that kind of stuff. So, I've been in that scene for a long, long time until I really launched my coaching business in 2016, and then it kind of took off within a year. It was full time. And then I just do branding and design for my own business now, this hat.
I dig it.
So
I still can't get over the fact that there was Giddy Up on the outsole of those Patagonias.
It was awesome, man. I have to say, like, I felt like as an athlete, it was one of those times, and that was back when like there was like even the stipends we were getting were tiny,
sure.
about amount per year or whatever per month. to run, and they're still tiny compared to other sports, right? That, I couldn't support a family of 5, you know?
Yeah.
So I could probably dirt bag out of my truck. Let's just put it that way. And I'd have to eat a lot of ramen. Um, so, but one of the things I remember just looking at that shoe when I got the first one, I was like, this is so cool. You know, like I felt like I had arrived as an athlete at that moment in my life. Like, but anyway, it was cool.
I have a ton of questions for you about the 200-mile scene, and then more specifically in a second about Cocodona. But you've talked at length before about the competitive considerations in a 100-mile race. Like in that race, it is short enough where surges make sense. You can be tactical in certain sections. Does that port neatly over to the 200-mile distance in your experience? Is it even possible to be like competitive in these races, or is it kind of like run your own race and hope that that is sufficient to podium or win or whatever?
I think the way I see racing 200 plus races, um, is that you run your own race until the last 100K, and then it's a race. That's how you have to look at it. I think. I think you have to manage it well so that you can be ready to race the last 100K. I think that's how 200s have to be raced personally.
And
After all
like
the experience of
there's
like
another
coaching
gear
Mike.
there.
What's that?
There's another gear there at 100K
No, I
left.
just mean mentally. Like you have to flip the switch to say we're racing now, right? But
Okay.
before that, you're taking care of yourself. You have to manage your own race, take care of yourself, stick to your plan, do it the way you think it should be done, and whatever works for you, because everyone's a little different, and some people can sleep, some people can't, right? Well, right? Yeah, and so it just depends on the race, and it depends on. But I mean, I think over the years, after coaching so many people to 200s, I've done one myself, but I've coached Mike McKnight for since his triple crown, since he won the second triple crown win, um, and all this other stuff. He's won a ton of races. I've paced him. I've crewed for him. I learned a lot just by being his coach.
Yeah.
We just learned, and he and I were learning together as we went, trial and error. Like, let's see if this works. Nope, that doesn't work. Oh yeah, that works. So, and everyone's different. Like Mike has trouble sleeping, so he just accepts that he can't sleep very well and only does it when it's absolutely necessary. Whereas I can sleep really well, so I prefer to sleep earlier and sleep ahead of time, and then see how the race unfolds. Um, and I coach at Sarah Ostazuski too, who won Cocodona last year,
Yeah.
and has the course record. And she likes to sleep early. She can sleep, and so she slept on night 1, she slept on night 2, and then she raced.
So I had the opportunity to be at the Barkley Marathons earlier this year, just as a member of the media,
Cool.
and it was fascinating in this for a lot of reasons. But for this topic, sleep, I'm pretty sure 4 of the 5 finishers didn't sleep at all in that 60-hour period. John Kelly may have slept for 15 minutes, if that. Uh, and obviously, they got it done. Even in Cocodona this year, it could be a 60-hour race. It very well may go under 60 hours. In that context, is it counterproductive for the front of the pack people like you to sleep? Is there still a place for sleep? How are you thinking about that?
I'm sleeping.
Are you?
Yeah. I think it's better to sleep early. Um, most of the advice is to sleep within the first, like, sleep somewhere around 36 to 40 hours in. So skip the first night. I think the opposite. I think you sleep on night 1,
Okay.
and maybe night 2, and then you know, but make sure you get sleep on night 1. Um, I think that it'll be weird. We'll see how that pans out, but I think it'll be interesting to see how the front, because we have such a deep men's field. I think it'll be interesting to see how that pans out with everybody's strategy, because I know there's probably quite a few of the front guys that won't sleep on night 1. And I might lose contact the first night, but hopefully that pays off later in the race.
You said you've learned a lot from coaching Sarah O, coaching Mike. Obviously, you had that Moab victory. You've scoped a lot of this course last year and then probably completed the rest of it in training this time around. What have you learned about being competitive at this race that you can share publicly for Cocodona? What are some interesting parts of this?
I think you got to manage yourself really well on day one. In 200s, if you make little mistakes on day one, they come back to bite you by, the last third of the race, like
Yeah.
in a big way. So I think that's one. I think it's hard not to sleep in 60 hours. I learned a lot at Moab from, I went with the mainstream, kind of approach and of skipping night one. And I feel like I struggled on day 2 and night 2 because of it. And that's why I've changed my strategy going into this race. And so I think it's better to sleep on night 1. When it's still like early and you're not really in race mode, you're not thinking as much about like the competition. I think it's better to sleep on night 1. So that's my biggest probably takeaway from just Moab was like the need for sleep earlier. And then let adrenaline do its thing and later.
How about pacing?
You got to run your own race. Like, it's so long. It's such a long distance that you just have to run your own race. You can't get caught up in other people's race or other people's pace. They could be being an idiot. So there's no reason to also be a foolish idiot. So, it takes maturity. It takes patience. I think that's one of the reasons that Mike set himself up for success. He's never gotten stressed when he's in like 5th early, when everyone else is like off the front, I think that's one of the things he's done really well on is just not freaking out. And then find that thing in the second half where you can go after people.
Are you thinking about a breakdown of hiking versus, running gait on day 1 and what like average pace or average
I
grade
think
adjusted pace
I'm
like?
looking at splits of the former of last year's race, especially.
Yeah.
I definitely am looking at what, Killian Korth was running and Versteeg, especially in the first half, and what Mike did in the second half. Because I feel like, you put those two together, it's a pretty good time. And knowing how, Mike struggled the first day last year, almost dropped, and then just like became a man
Resurrected.
possessed. What's that?
Resurrected.
Yeah, dude. He raged to the second half. Yeah. So I do think that there's, the thing about 200s is you just don't run them hard. It's like a mellow day out with buddies, like running at that pace, because it's so long. So I love how laid back it is that way. You don't have to get stressed. You can like hang out with people and like talk and you don't have to like get stressed about like, oh my gosh, because in 100 you're like head down. You're not talking much. You're focusing, you're hydrating, you're eating, you're making sure you get through the aid station as fast as freaking possible. And I think that some of those things apply to 200s if we're going to race them. But there's so many other moving parts that you could mess up that, pacing is just one of them. You definitely go too hard first day.
Yeah.
The first 24 hours.
I'm just, again, you definitely know this better than I was not around, but like, was there ever a point in the evolution of hundreds where even that distance was laid back and people went there because
it was definitely more laid back in the 2000s? Like just the first like 30, 40 miles were way more laid back. It's so much faster now. Like just in general, like the whole pace, if I look at like how I race hundreds now at something like Western States, you're trying to run as fast as you can, but still hold back. There's this like fine line that you're trying to find in 100. I feel like in the first like 60K, but you can blow it in that first 60K easily by just running 20 seconds a mile too fast, you know? Um, and then it comes back just to bite you later. And we see that. That's why we see carnage there, right? That's why you see carnage in these bigger races like UTMB and Western States and stuff like
I
that.
just, I just wonder if in 5 to 10 years we see something similar in 200s and they're just as savage, and it's even more
I
hard
can't
to
even
fathom.
imagine being that savage for that long. It's like, it's so long. It's mentally draining because 100 milers are mentally draining to race at that level,
Yeah,
right? It's a long time to be on.
cool.
Whereas the 200s are different because you're just cruising for a long, 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 long time and taking care of yourself, right? Trying to be proactive, trying to take care of yourself. Just let the miles fly by. Don't do anything stupid. Um, so I think they're definitely, it's a different beast for sure. I mean, maybe we'll see. I mean, they're new. They're really new.
It's also a super gear intensive race, which I think makes it even more fascinating to prepare for if you're a fan, spectate, if you're a runner, to race. Is there anything you can say about how you're approaching sort of like the mandatory gear requirements or what you're including in your pack or with your crew that might be interesting to the audience?
I think for me, the biggest thing at Cocodona is the water carrying capacity. Like, how are you going to carry the mandatory 4 liters in the first day? And probably a bit based on the feedback I get from veterans of that race, you probably need more than 4 liters. So yeah, 4 liters is the bare minimum, but you probably need more. So just figuring out how to carry that comfortably, right, in the best way you can, because there's a lot of different options, with different size flasks. There's 500 milliliter flasks, there's 750 milliliter flasks, there's bladders, there's So are you doing a combo of the two? Are you doing all bladder? Are you doing
Right.
all flasks? There's so many different ways you can carry it, and I have to say, I think I've got my system down, but I'm still tinkering a little bit on like exactly how I want to carry. But I think I've kind of got it dialed. Let's just say I've spent a decent amount of cash at the local outdoor store on hydration parts. Um,
Really
yeah, making my own system.
interesting.
Yeah,
Maybe a future Ultraspire product.
yeah. Well, it's coming from Ultraspire, but um, the prototypes might not be here for Cocodona, so I had to go try to copy that prototype as closely as I could, in case they don't show up. They're supposed to show up, but it's all parts that can be bought over the counter. So
Yeah.
I went and made them. A combination of a local store and Amazon. I was able to kind of put the pieces together. So
This is maybe you're already on this wavelength. This is something I've thought about for a while, especially for that first 37-mile section. You can imagine a jetpack on someone's back in like a space scenario. I would love to see the pack equivalent of that, where you could have these like super long flasks that sit in like a jetpack style on the outer backside of a pack, and that could kind of solve the
long carrying
long, yeah, and
tubes.
maybe they each carry like a liter or a liter and a half of water, and right there you've solved for 3 liters of carrying capacity.
Yeah, and I think the crazy thing, the hardest part is like, in a race like this, there's so many, the aid stations are so much farther apart. So the weight you have to carry in your pack is heavier, right? Because you're always carrying more water than a normal 100 miler, for example. Most of the time
Yep.
in 100, you're doing a liter, right? And in almost every section is about a liter, maybe a liter and a half at something like Hard Rock. But, for at least for the front of the pack, I should say, for our speed. But like, um, uh, I think it's weird because there's so many different mileage sections, like distances. So everyone's its own unique carrying capacity, right? So like one section you might be carrying 4.5 liters, and another one you might be only carrying a liter. And then another section you might be carrying 3 liters. And another one you might be carrying a liter and a half. Another section you might be carrying 2 liters, right?
Mm.
Based on the time of day you're there, or like how cool it's going to be, or how hot it's going to be. So you're trying to figure out, like, in a 3-day window, where am I going to be on the course, and how much do I need to probably carry for that section, because it's going to be in the middle of the day in
Right.
Sedona, right? Or Cottonwood or something down in the desert. Excuse me. But it just, I mean, that's what's the logistics are. That's why I keep saying that like 200s are like hundreds on steroids, because they're just, there's so many moving parts that you have to think about, like, and keep track of when you're tired,
I was going to say, yeah, and if you have a crew that you can outsource that sort of brain operation to, more to you, but that you have to be with it to some extent. How about hydration? So, and I'm most interested in like how you're thinking about hydration on the second day, on the third day, because I feel like you can, again, you can get away with some things on day one, hydration wise, but things obviously problems accumulate on day 2 and 3. How do you think about that challenge?
um for me, I'm just trying to figure out, like we were talking about, like how much ideally in each section based on my splits, what time of day it's going to be, and approximately, I'll look at the forecast once we're close to the race and finalize that plan. Um, but right now I'm just basing it on general like averages, of what we have in May for different
Yeah.
sections of the course. So I'm looking at forecast average for May 6th or May 7th, in certain sections of the course of where I'm going to be. So I kind of know what the temps are. And I'm basing my hydration plan on those temperatures. And based on my own, loss rate per hour and that kind of stuff, my personal loss rate.
Are you like sweat tested and stuff? So you know like the composition rate, etc. Yeah.
Yeah, I know my sodium concentration per liter of sweat. I also know my sweat rate in different temperatures
Wow.
per hour.
Wow.
And then I fine tune that onto my race plan on a spreadsheet for crew and for myself. So it's pretty technical.
Oh
It's a
my
lot of just sitting in front of a computer and like working on spreadsheets and notes.
It's wild. And I know I'm asking you a lot of like miscellaneous category questions about the race. Only a few more, I promise. Foot care. Talk to us about foot care, what you've learned, especially from Moab, how you're thinking about foot care for Cocodona.
Proactive foot care. I mean, that's what we coach, proactive foot care. So taking care of yourself early, cleaning your feet. What I did in Moab, I about 4 times I dunked my feet in water. So my crew had a little bin, like a little Rubbermaid bin, short one, and a little jug of water, and they'd put clean water in a washcloth, and I'd come in and take socks and shoes off and dip my feet, dry them off, so they're clean with a washcloth, and then dry them with a towel, and then let them sit there while I ate and dry out, then re-lube, fresh socks on. Sometimes a shoe change to a different model, and sometimes just the same shoe back on, but clean socks and clean feet and re-lubed feet.
Are
So
you
being
taping it all?
proactive. What's that?
Are you taping it all?
Um, I do a little pre-taping, but not a ton. Uh, but I do have a blister kit, a field blister kit that I use in the field. One of the things that's never happened to me before, I got heat blisters at Moab because it was so hot. Um, and I made the mistake of wearing a newer sock that was not as tested. I tested it, but not in super hot conditions. And it was a merino wool sock. And I wish I would have done Cool Max. And I think I wouldn't have got the heat blisters had I worn Cool Max. And I switched to Cool Max later, and I quit getting. But then once they start flaring, once you have them, they're there. And so then I had to do a bunch of like 3 or 4 times. I had to do some taping, like 2 times in the field and like 2 times, one time at an aid station. Actually, a volunteer taped me. But yeah, I mean, that was something I never really dealt with in 100. It was new. So I've got different strategy now just from that experience.
How about nutrition? I know we were talking about nutrition earlier. How does OFM and everything you do on a daily basis play into this race in terms of, how you resupply at aid stations with your crew, stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, I do like 70% of my calories from liquid. So on the go. So I'm doing Tailwind, and with some extra electrolytes mixed in, Relight from Redmond Relight. And I also just do gels and
Wow.
gummy bears, organic gummy bears.
For 3 days, 3 days.
Yeah, I mean, I'll do a little bit of scrambled eggs and mashed potatoes with crew and some broth, like bone broth.
The
Um,
good stuff.
yeah, my own stuff. I'm allergic to soybean oil, so like I have to stay away from a lot of the aid station food. I have historically not used aid stations much, except for refill of water, or maybe a little fruit, you know, off the table. But that's really about it because I just so much stuff has soybean oil in it, um, that whether it's okay. I'll give you a perfect example. Like if I ask for eggs at an aid station, they probably have Pam, right, for the skillet. Pam has soybean oil in it. So like if I see Pam, I'm like, can't have that, right? So sometimes they have butter, and so that's cool, and I have to ask for them to cook it in butter, right, or something. But I just prefer, if I have crew, I just prefer to do my own food the whole time, and then I know I'm not getting any. I'm getting good ingredients, good eggs, good mashed potatoes with no added junk in it, that kind of stuff. Yeah, I kind of stick to my own stuff.
What are the biggest question marks for you heading into this race? And maybe the larger question I have for you is like, knowing what you know from coaching Mike, coaching Sarah, doing these races before, how much do you feel like you figured out? How much are you experimenting? Where are the question marks
Uh,
for you personally?
my question marks. Um, well, I think the sleep thing's the biggest question mark because we have a deep field. I mean, it was different at Moab because I had a huge lead. When you have no one breathing down your neck, it's really easy to sleep. You know, um, I don't know how that'll pan out. That's probably my biggest question mark. Like, I want to sleep earlier, but will I be able to sleep when I know there's like a guy in front of me and two guys in front of me, or we came in together and I'm sleeping and they leave? You know, like that's probably the biggest question mark. That kind of stuff. Whether those strategies are going to pan out, right?
Yeah,
I think that's probably number one.
because you're here to win, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and you think to win, you don't necessarily have to stick with the lead. You could lose touch, and you're
Oh,
okay.
yeah. In a 200, yes. I think
So
you could lose.
what's it going to take to win? What's it going to take to win this race?
It's going to take a course record.
Okay.
Definitely a course record. A pretty solid course record, I think. Definitely, because it's 69 something, 69, 41, 31.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of time to shave there.
Yeah, because Mike had a really rough first day last year. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of time to shave. I think there's, um, and that's the legit course last year was. If you look at like String Bean's time or running 59 something, like it had half the climbing, tons of easy terrain. You didn't have your first 37 hard. That first 37 is hard. So it didn't have that section. So I think it's going to take low 60s minimum to win.
What do you think the median stoppage time for the men's podium will be?
Oh man. You mean like stop time? Like aid
Like,
station time,
including just going into
naps?
8. Yeah, exactly. All of that, just stoppage.
I don't know. That one's a tough one. I hadn't even really thought that one. There's so many aid stations. I was just trying to see
Well,
one,
okay. How about
two,
this?
three. What,
While
we
we're
have like
thinking about it,
28
like,
stations or something.
how much time will do you anticipate spending at each individual aid station that you won't be sleeping at? How in and out will you be?
Pretty quick.
Okay,
Yeah, I
like
don't know.
sub 10 minutes.
Oh yeah,
Okay,
yeah, quick. I think
okay.
it's gonna. I think it's gonna take running it sort of like a pit crew type situation, except in the key spots.
What are the
Um,
key spots?
oh, just key spots where you have crew, where you've got to
Gotcha.
do more stuff. Like if you got to do shoe change, sock change, foot care, there's those kind of things you got to take care of. You got to be proactive, and I think that's an important piece of this race. But I do think that we're going to have to be fairly efficient at aid stations, um, in this race. I mean, I think otherwise you're just going to have to run harder.
Hmm.
So we'll see. I mean, it's cool that this is going to be like, this is the deepest field there's ever been in the U.S. in a 200.
I was going to say, does that mean anything to you, or is it just kind of like, whatever? Like, it's fun and it might inspire me a little bit in training, but like, yeah, does it mean
No,
anything to
it's
you?
inspired me. Yeah, I mean, I put in more volume in this buildup than I ever have. I've definitely put in the training. I put in the work. I mean, Arlen Glick and I ran rim to rim yesterday.
I saw
So
that.
yeah, so we're exactly 3 weeks out yesterday. So, we were talking about it on the drive back because he came pick me up. He's staying in Cottonwood in his RV, and so he came and picked me up at my house in Flag, and then we drove over there early and did it, and then he drove back and dropped me off because he has to go through Flag to get there. And we were talking about on the way back, like after we did it, we're like, all right, we got through that unscathed. Sweet. Like that was kind of the last big day. Now we don't really, I mean, we could both just taper from here on out and be fine. But we both were kind of like, okay, that's cool. Good. It was kind of like a fist bump. Like, okay, we're ready. Like, yeah, we're both fit and we're ready. So
have you gotten any interest from other top athletes in the sport that have not dipped into 200s yet because you've done it and you've kind of stoked something in them? Or are the people that are here at Cocodona this year, Arlen, you, Joe, Mike, sort of on your own island? You guys are early adopters.
no one's really like necessarily kind of come to me and talk. I mean, some of my friends that have already were dabbling, and like Jesse Haynes has dabbled in it. He's done Bigfoot. He won Moab this last year. He and I just catch up on the phone every once in a while and talk running. And so like he's one that we kind of inspire each other, and so we geek out together on that kind of stuff. But I haven't had a lot of like elites come up and say, hey, this is something I really want to do. Besides Arlen, I think Arlen's the only one that he was there last year
Cool.
he came and helped and volunteered. I think he paced last year, and I think that just being there made him want to run. That's what happened to me. Once I went to a one, I went and helped Mike, and then I was like, because he had done quite a few before I actually showed up at one, and once I showed up, I went to Moab, and I was like, I think I want to try to do one of these. I mean, I've already been thinking about it because I was coaching it, because I was coaching middle and back of the Packers. I coached not only Mike, the Triple Crown, but a couple other kind of back of the Packer, Triple Crown runners. And it's totally different in the middle and the back of the pack. You got to get more sleep. You're going to be out more nights. There's a different strategy for the middle, the back of the pack. But I'd seen it from the front for Mike, and I wanted to understand it, so I went and paced him the last 70 into 2021 when he won. That was a hard pace, by the way. I would never pace 70 miles again.
70 miles.
That was, I don't know what I was thinking. I don't know. In my head, it sounded okay when I said yes. Because he kind of was like, where do you want to pace from?
I signed up for the race.
I know, exactly. I should have at least gone and run 100 in the fall and like got another win or something. So anyway, afterwards, I mean, I remember the last 20 miles, I was like, I am a worthless pacer right now. I'm just trying to take care of myself at this point. But yeah, I mean, that just like really intrigued me going to it. And I think once some of these guys that are fast, younger guys or like 100-mile runners, if they go volunteer or go hang out at these things, they'll be like, I kind of want to do it. And then once you do it, it's like, it's even like so much more many puzzle pieces than like 100. It's so much more complex. And then you start thinking like, oh, if I did that, or then I did that, oh, I could run that much faster, right? Like there's all these other like moving parts that you do, your wheels start turning. And I mean, I think that's why I like the long races, 100s and 200s. And, they're complex and they aren't simple. They take a lot of planning, and they take a lot of preparation and a lot of thinking, to nail them.
Yeah, this is the frontier, and I think when some people hear the frontier, they're attracted, and that'll be the next wave. The people who just when they hear the word frontier, they're like, I want to go and operate there. That
in the
sounds
frontier.
Cool.
Yeah, it's kind of fun. I have to say, it's kind of fun to know. Like, I mean, even when you're saying, "What do you think this course is going to go?" It's like, I don't know. I don't know what it's. I mean, I don't know yet. We haven't had competition. crazy competition yet. This is the first 200 that there's been, like 200 plus, that there's like in the men's field. It's deep. So you're like, I mean, with experience, like guys with experience, right? Fast guys with 100-mile experience, like Arlen, but haven't run a 200 yet, right? Or, but most of the men's field that's favored, at least, have at least a 200 under their belt or more, right? So there's experience there, which they have their own strategies, and their own opinions on how if you ask them some of the same questions you asked me, they probably have a different answer, so because we're still pioneering this sport. We don't even know how you should do it exactly. Like even some of the common things that they want you to kind of do, or what they say you should do, I don't agree with. If you went and listened to podcasts right now, listen to Jason Koop's podcast on 200s, I wouldn't agree with about 3 or 4 things he says. But that's because of my experience with Mike and Sarah, right? Coaching them directly and them performing and doing well, and seeing when they perform and when they kind of struggle, and where they do better. And I think there's a key to that. So I think it's just a different sport, man. It's a weird sport. It's its own like weird beast.
Yeah. I forgot that Coop is like, he's a practitioner. Like, he's a veteran of 200s. He's done Tour. He's done Cocodona.
Yeah, he has.
Kind of balled out at Cocodona there a couple years back.
Did. Yeah, there was a really funny one, and this is, and I'll poke fun at Coop because we're friends. But one of the things I saw on the, I love the live feed, and people are making comments the whole time. And one of the things, Coop, everybody knows this is public knowledge. We don't necessarily agree on nutrition.
Of course.
Right? And
I listened to the episode.
Yeah. And so one of the things I thought was really funny was someone said, and they had to be in our camp, because he went and like when Mike passed him, the next aid station, he slept. And somebody said, carbs, 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 Z, 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 because you crash. And I thought that was funny. So Jason, I love you, bro. So don't take that the wrong way, but I thought that was a really funny one. It's just like carbs, carbs, carbs. But that's the cool thing about OFM. And I think OFM is where, 200s is where OFM really shines. I think we were just talking about it. Jesse Haynes and I were talking about it. The last 3 or 4 Moabs have been won by OFM athletes.
Yeah, that's wild. And Jesse's OFM, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, it does definitely, the fat burning thing helps, the longer it goes, and the lower the output, right? So less intense overall. I mean, but the cool thing is we've seen in the lab that we can actually output at a really high level and burn fat, at a high percentage of VO2 max, but way off the charts, way higher than the textbooks say. But I think it really shines when we get in these long distance things, 100 plus.
Yeah. So you're saying in an OFM athlete, like that conversion point could be higher than a highly trained elite athlete who's fueling primarily on carbs?
Yeah, I mean, we're still using carbs during the race, but I'm saying we're using our everyday lifestyle diet to manipulate our metabolism enough to burn fat at a way higher rate. Our fat burn rate's over 2 grams a minute. My peak fat oxidation rate's like 2.2 grams a minute. So is Pete Mortimer's. I don't know. We've been trying to get Mike in the lab, but I haven't got him in there yet. But Vespa's put us in a lab, and we've seen really high fat oxidation rates at a really high, and we've had Nick Curry as well in those, and he and we've seen really high. Our crossover points are really high as a percentage of our VO2, right? Traditionally, it's like 65% of VO2. Like mine's like 91%. So I hit my crossover point at like 91% of my VO2 max.
Interesting. By the way, Nick Curry, that's a name that I want to see at Cocodona. I want to see Nick Curry try to negative split Cocodona.
Right? I would too. I think you actually could. I don't know, man. Because if you throw in Eldon and Kasner, which is in the second half of the race, both those big climbs at altitude. But then you throw in the heat and the huge amount, 25% of the climbing in the first 37. I don't know. They might be equal as far as difficulty. So, yeah, I'd like to see Nick here too. We could get his Achilles like healed up really well, but he's training for Western States right now.
Yeah.
We duked it out at Mesquite Canyon 50 about a month
That's right.
ago.
All right. Last question I've got for you, and I actually sent you this question ahead of time because we're still in this relatively murky, mysterious, wild west of 200s. I had to ask if you had to create an ultra running brain trust that's centered around knowledge of this event, this distance, with the caveat that it's all about performing at this distance at a high level. Who would be on the list and why? You can include athletes, coaches, researchers, anybody. Like a Mount Rushmore of knowledge.
Well, I'll give Coop a little like love. I think Coop should be on that list because he's got such a deep knowledge. He's been doing it forever. I really respect him. We agree on 95% of stuff. There's only a little small portion we don't necessarily agree on. But for most part, I love Coop. So I think he'd be on that list, right? Because he's just a premier coach. I'd put him on that list. I think Kevin Goldberg should be on that list. I like his attitude. I like his mindset. I like how he approaches the races. He's a cool dude. I think he's would be
here this year.
What's that?
He's running this year.
Yes, he is. So I think he'd be on that list. I'd probably I definitely put Mike on there just because he's got the experience, right? I'd also probably put Ben Light on that list just because he's crewed so much for Mike. He's got a good perspective. We've shared some knowledge getting ready for Cocodona this year. Wes Rittner would be another one. He's finished a ton of 200s. He's got good. He's a student of the sport. So I think I'd put him on there from a think tank perspective. I coach him as well, and I really respect his opinions. So he'd be in that list. And I put String Bean in there just because his long-term experience, he's nailed some stuff. I definitely put him on that list. And yeah, I mean, that's probably what's that? 5 or 6 people? That's who I'd put on that list. Yeah, that's who came to me when you sent me that email. Those are the first ones I wrote down. I just wrote down who came to me first. And that's who it is. And those are people I have experience with too, and I know them, Jesse Haynes might be another one I'd put on there just because he's got the experience too. And we've talked strategy quite a bit. And I put Sarah Ostazuski on there.
Of course.
Because she's got experience and she's sharp. She's a thinker. So I respect her as well. And since she's local, when we do coaching calls, we don't do coaching calls, we do coaching coffee. So sometimes especially getting ready before in the early days of planning for Cocodona, I was asking her as much questions as she was asking me. So because she has more experience in 200s than I do, and so I'm like, I want to learn from her experience.
I said that was the last question. I've actually got one more because you reminded me. You said String Bean, and it reminded me. You're going for the win. Who is the biggest threat in the men's field to taking your win at this race?
Like 5 guys.
Of the 5, you got to pick one. Gun to your head.
Oh man, who is the biggest threat
and why?
Man, I don't know if I can call that out. That is like, I might have to take the shot to the head. I mean, I think String Bean is I think if he's fit, he's really good at logistics and transitions. So he's strong there. Mike's tough. So if Mike can nail day 1 and stay in the mix, he's traditionally struggled on day 1 in the heat. Yeah. But if he can nail day 1, I think he's a threat. Obviously Arlen is definitely a dark horse because he hasn't done it yet, right? So we don't know. He could nail it and he'd be like, whoa, crazy. and he could blow up. We don't know, right? So, I mean, that's kind of how I look at it. Like, and then I think Killian Korth is due for a blow, like a breakout. You know, he's obviously strong. He's got some experience at this distance. He struggled last year with like pulmonary edema in the second half. So, you know, Mike wouldn't have caught him had he not had that. If he would have just been able to maintain. He ran a really good first half, or you could argue maybe he ran a stupid first half and went too fast. I don't know. And then you got Versteeg too, right? So like, you know, like Versteeg, like obviously can run well here, and he ran kind of unopposed the first year. Like 72 hours, but that year was like crazy in the first day where they didn't have as much water. He's obviously really good in the heat, and does well in the heat. So, you know, I mean, just it's hard to pick one guy. You know, personally, I'd like to see it be me and Mike, but because I coach Mike, you know, I'd like to see the two of us duke it out at the end. But I'm gonna be non-committal on that answer.
Bottom line, there will be fireworks. This is not only is this the deepest field ever in an American 200, it's also, I think, the most entertaining, with athletes that have different skill sets to leverage at various points on the course, very different personalities.
Very diverse.
It all makes for great storytelling. It's going to be awesome.
Well, and we've got Aravaipa. It's an Aravaipa race, so like we've got live feed and video, right? Like everybody loves that. You know, I mean, awesome. I'm peeled to it all week when I'm coaching on.
No one's working that week. No one's working that week.
I mean, it's going on one of my screens the whole time in between my coaching calls because it's normally, it's during the week. So, like, I love Cocodona, and then it's right by my, the finish line's like 12 minutes from my house. So, I've been here since I moved here in March of 21 in Flagstaff, and the race was the first year was 21. So like I've been here for every year. I haven't missed a Cocodona yet. I love it. I love the race week. It's so fun. It's so much energy in this town during that week. Yeah, I love it. So I'm looking forward to it.
Well, Jeff, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much. We'll make sure to link to your socials, the coaching business in the show notes. Any final thoughts or calls to action that you want to leave listeners and viewers with before we go?
No, just if you're interested in coaching, I do have availability with my other coaches. I have 3 other coaches that have availability. I am full at the moment. I'm usually full year round. Unfortunately, it's kind of one off, one on. So if you do really want to get coached by me, reach out and I'll put you on a wait list. And I do have people do that from time to time and say, hey, just wait for a spot to open up. But I do have availability with my other coaches. They have been coached by me and mentored by me for multiple years. They all share the same philosophies. So, and you do get access to me as well in a group video call every 2 weeks. So know that, and you just got to go to giddyupultra.com.